Hi guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel AlgoWise. So in the last video, we discussed about central bank, role of central bank, basics of macroeconomics, and monetary easing and tightening. So in this video, we'll discuss more on the monetary supply, the base monetary supply, and M2 monetary supply. And so we have the same guest, Pratik. He would be explaining in detail about those topics. So welcome, Pratik.
Thank you, Kalyan, for inviting. So yeah, we can discuss further about the same topic. It's not exactly the same topic, but basics of macroeconomics.
Yeah, the continuation of the last topics. Yeah.
Right. So first of all, I think you would remember that I was discussing about the money flow, which was sort of happening, right? From one person to another person. Let's say 1,000 rupees circulating between me and you, and then it is circulating let's say from you to somebody else, and then somebody else to somebody else, right? So that was basically the concept of velocity of money, right? We were talking about velocity. What is the way, or what is the rate at which the money is flowing in the economy? Right?
Okay.
So that was one concept that we had introduced, that is basically the velocity of money supply. Similarly, we have another concept which is called as the actual money supply, right? So first of all, you have to understand that there is something called as base money, and there is something called as M2 money supply. There is M1, M2, different sort of money supply, but I'll try to make it very simple, right? So we also discussed a little bit about the central banks, right? The central banks have the responsibility of creating money. They are the entities who are responsible for creating money in the economy. So they can create more amount of money, or they can create less amount of money, or they can in fact reduce the money supply also, right? That is basically by changing the amount of government bonds or other assets it basically holds, right? So that's how they control the money supply. Now, whatever money supply is being created by the central bank of any country, let's say the Federal Reserve in the US, or RBI in the India, or any other bank like Bank of England in the UK, right? So these banks are basically responsible for creating the money supply. And once they create the money supply, whatever supply has been created in the market, that is the base money. That is simply called the base money, right? After that, we have got multiple different components of money, right? There is a broader money supply, which is sort of called as M2 money supply or M3 money supply. And there is base money, there is M1 money supply. Now, what exactly is M2? I'll not go into too many details about this topic, basically, because it might confuse people. But I definitely want to cover something about the M2 money supply. M2 is basically your base money, plus all the cash that is sort of circulating in the market, plus all the checking deposits, plus all the savings deposit, which basically means that all the fixed deposits that you do at the bank, all the money that you actually save at the bank, and other components, basically all of them will go into the M2 money supply. Now, there is one peculiar thing that happens, like whatever money you keep with the bank, it does not remain only with the bank, because the bank goes and lends out that money. Let's say you deposited 100 rupees at the bank. Now the bank may go and lend out 80 rupees out of that and keep the 20 rupees as the reserve, right? So that 80 rupees, do not get scared. This is how the banking system works. It's not something to get scared of. Like, suppose I keep 100 rupees and I want my 100 rupees back. Will the bank only give me 20 rupees? You might get scared when I said that. But that's not how it works, because not everybody wants their money back at the same point of time. Because of that, what banks do is, banks will keep certain percentage. Let's say in my example, it was 20%. They are keeping 20%, and the rest of the 80% basically goes out as loans. Now, let's say the bank lends out that money to you, to Kalyan, right? Now, Kalyan, you have got 80 rupees. What will you do? 80 rupees you have got as lending. Maybe you have some requirement to travel. You basically spend that 80 rupees in travel. And now somebody else, let's say the hotel, got that 80 rupees. Now the hotel again keeps it in the bank, and that bank basically, out of 80 rupees, it will basically lend out again 80% of that, which is 64 rupees. So this is how money multiplies also. Okay. Because of this, the base money and the broader money will be different. Let me show you one small visual of it. You will probably understand better. Let me try to share my screen. So if you look at this particular area, right, there is a broad money, there is a base money. You can see the overall definition, but that is what I sort of try to make you understand. Whatever is the base money is the currency that is kind of in circulation and in the bank reserves. That is basically called as M0 money supply.
Okay.
Now, the broader money supply is even broader than M2, but let's not go into that. Let's simply consider M2 money supply. That will include your deposits in the bank. Now, deposits have a multiplier effect, just like I mentioned. There is a multiplier effect, and with that multiplier effect, your base money will actually multiply further into broad money supply. Right? So that's how it happens.
Okay.
Now that you understand the basic difference between the base and broad money, I want to introduce about the concept of GDP also. GDP is what? GDP is basically the overall gross domestic product of a country. Now, if I just talk to you about GDP, what do you understand? Like, do you have any thoughts about GDP which you can share?
Yeah, I think it's the overall income of a country, or maybe if you consider a state, or then in that case, overall income of that particular state, or
Exactly.
whatever we define it exactly. So if it's a state,
Yes.
then it will be the GDP of a particular state, let's say Karnataka, or if it's a country we are considering, then the overall income of that particular country.
Exactly. So I don't want to get into technical details too much, but I just want to explain you that it can be calculated. The GDP can be calculated based on the expenditure approach or the income approach.
Okay.
It's both the same. The ultimate thing should basically be the same, which means that income of one person is expenditure of another
Of
person.
another
It
person.
basically
Correct,
means
correct.
that.
Mm.
So from the expenditure approach, you can say that GDP is basically the sum of consumption that we are consuming. We are spending the money, right? There is government spending. Government is also spending some money by taking loans or by its income. Government has its own income, right, from taxes and other sources. So it will also spend money. So let's consider government spending. Let's also consider investment. Investment is basically the investment that companies do or individuals do, any kind of investment that you are making, not just in the stock market, but let's say productive investments, basically, which is like you are buying an asset, you are buying, let's say, a factory, you are creating some sort of machinery, all those things will go into investment, right? And
Okay.
there is a net of export and import, because ultimately the money that you are spending, there is some import that you are doing. So you are spending that money out of that country or out of that state. Similarly, you are doing some kind of exports. So the net of exports and import will basically also add up in the consumption or the expenditure approach of the GDP.
So
So this is
basically,
how
if
you
exports
normally
are more, in that case, it will be a plus point, and if it's less, in that case, it will add a negative thing to the GDP, right? Overall.
exactly. That's how it is.
Okay.
So this is how you can think about GDP basically. So you can understand that if somebody is consuming more, people are spending more and more money. Obviously, the GDP will go up. If people are spending less money, at that point of time, what happens? Maybe there is a recession, right? People are spending less amount of money. There is no demand in the market. At that point of time, government might want to increase its spending, because government spending is also a component of GDP. If government increases the spending, maybe it will spur some sort of demand in the market.
Like it
So
was
what
done
can
in
happen is,
during COVID, right? Whatever stimulus package they announced, so that was kind of a spending only, directly pumped in, money pumped in into the market, right?
yes, exactly. So you can do different sorts of spending. You can do productive investment, which is like ports, let's say roads, ports, and other
Infrastructure.
productive investment like education, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Or you can do some investment like you can just pay money to people. You are just paying the money to people so that people can go and spend that money. You can increase consumption by that approach, right? So government can spend in different ways. Similarly, we have got investment demand that can come up. If we are exporting more, obviously GDP will increase,
So this
right? So these are the,
investment part, it includes the foreign investors also, right? Foreign institutional FIIs also it includes.
yeah. So the entire thing basically,
Entire
because
thing,
that
entire
is
thing.
sort of
Okay.
a currency thing. But yeah, if you go into that, I mean, if people are coming into India and
Yeah.
investing their money, that is also adding up to the GDP.
Correct. Correct. Okay. Okay.
If you look at the M2 money supply again, so you can see that this is the US M2 money supply, right? So you can see the results of the last 30, 40 years. If I just take you through the last 10 years, you can see that in 2020, the M2 money supply significantly went up. And that was basically because the Fed started giving a lot of stimulus, which means they created a lot of money. They increased the base money supply. That is why it went up quite significantly. Now you can see it is getting flatter at this point in time. So yeah, it is not dependent just on the Fed. It is also dependent on people, because people can multiply money, or banks can multiply money by lending more, right? So
Correct.
that's basically the approach. But again, these are basically, the things which are sort of basics of macroeconomics. Again, one more thing is sort of inflation, because GDP has got two different ways of measuring. One can be nominal GDP, one can be the real GDP. Real
Okay.
GDP basically means that in constant currency terms, not constant currency, but in constant inflation terms. Let's say we are taking a bucket of 2000. So whatever prices were there in 2000, at that prices, what is the GDP at this point of time, right?
Okay.
So effectively, nominal GDP is equal to real GDP plus inflation. Now, inflation is
Oh,
what? Inflation is the rate of price change, right? Rate of
yeah,
price
rate of
change is
price
the,
rise or price change.
yes. So maybe whatever you are purchasing, that may be increasing at 100%, but the inflation measured by CPI can still be at 0%. Why? Because your thing, the thing that you are, let's say, buying, that price may have gone up quite significantly, but the measurement of that in the inflation basket may be very, very low. Because of that, it's
Correct.
not making a lot of dent to inflation.
So in this
So in case of,
inflation basket has a lot of commodities and equal, like some sort of weightages to it, right? Like it has got
yes,
food or maybe real estate, some like that.
yes, exactly. So in case of India, the food is one of the major component. Around 45% basically is food. In case of US, for example, the developed economies, it is very less. It is less than 10%. Food
Okay.
contributes less than 10%. In
Okay.
case of India, real estate contributes less than 10%, or approximately 10%. But in case of US, it contributes around 30 to 40%. 30% if you just talk about real estate. If you talk about associated services, it is almost about 40% of the inflation basket. Not the
Okay.
GDP. I'm not talking about GDP here, but the inflation basket basically. So again,
Okay.
inflation, I mean, you can think of inflation as something that consumers are getting, which is measured as CPI. You can also think about WPI, which is sort of the wholesale price measure,
Okay.
right? But that's basically, if you know these things, at least whenever you are going into the market and you are talking to people, or you are, let's say, reading an economic journal, you should be able to understand what is happening basically.
Okay. 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 Uh, okay. Fine, Pratik. So I think these topics were really nicely elaborated by you, and then so we'll have one more video, and in the next video we can discuss about the current scenario of the markets in general, maybe the US markets, and how it affects the world markets in general, or maybe our Indian markets. So we'll discuss in detail about that in our next video.
Sure, Kalyan. So, in fact, what we can do is we can talk about the current scenario, and the scenario keeps changing because the data that is basically coming out, based on that, the scenario keeps changing. We can keep discussing about those topics. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you have any more doubts, let's say on basics of macroeconomics, or if any of your users have any doubts, then also we can discuss more about it.
Sure. Correct. So yeah, so what I'll do, I'll in the description link, I'll post the link of the first video also. So what we discussed in the first video, so that our viewers can watch that too. And in the third video, we'll discuss more on the current economic scenario. And I think we'll keep making such videos, so that because current scenario always keeps evolving, and then something new comes up, and it's always evolving. So we'll keep making such videos. We'll discuss more on those topics. Yeah.
Sure, Kalyan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pratik, so much for joining. So we'll see you in the next video. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Pratik.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.